Mornings used to be sacred to me. The kind of sacred that comes not from prayer, but from ritual. The gentle unfolding of another day in a life well lived. So I'd wake at 6:30, exactly as I had for 47 years of marriage. Though George had been gone for 3 years now, some habits, I suppose, are too deeply rooted to die with the person who helped create them. The house would be quiet then, holding its breath in that golden hour before the world stirred. I'd slip into my burgundy robe, the one George bought me for our 40th anniversary, and pat across the hardwood floors he'd laid himself during our first year in this house. Every creak was a memory, every shadow a whisper of the life we'd built together. I'd make my tea first, Earl Grey steeped for exactly 4 minutes. George used to tease me about my precision. "Keely," he'd say, watching me time it with the kitchen clock. "It's tea, not surgery." But precision, I learned, was how you held on to the things that mattered. When everything else felt like it was slipping away, the sunroom was where. I'd sit with my china kutha, one with the tiny roses that matched the garden George planted for me, and I'd listen to my records, Chopin mostly, sometimes Debussy. When I felt particularly melancholy, the needle would find its groove, and those familiar notes would fill the space where conversation used to live. I'd watch the roses through the window while the music played. Pink David Austin roses, climbing roses that George had trained up. The trellis. And the deep red ones that bloomed only in June. He'd spent every weekend for 15 years perfecting that garden. For my Eleanor, he'd say, dirt under his fingernails, sweat on his brow, so you can have beauty to look at while you play. The piano sat in the corner of the sunroom. A 1967 Steinway baby grand that had been our first major purchase after George's promotion to principal. I'd run my fingers over the keys sometimes, playing scales or fragments of the pieces I used to teach my students. 32 years of teaching piano to children who giggled through their lessons and forgot to practice. But oh, the ones who remembered the ones who found something in the music that spoke to their souls. Those were the moments that made it all worthwhile. After my tea, I'd tend to the roses. George had taught me everything: how to prune, how to fertilize, how to recognize the early signs of disease. "Plants are like people, Ellie," he'd said, showing me how to deadhead the spent blooms. "They need attention, care, and sometimes they need you to cut away the parts that aren't serving them anymore." I thought about that often in the months after Derek stopped calling Derek, my son, my only child. The boy who used to crawl into my lap during piano lessons and try to play along with his tiny fingers. The teenager who'd roll his eyes at my old-fashioned ways but still ask me to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat when he couldn't sleep. The man who'd given me 2 grandchildren I barely knew, who lived in a suburb 40 minutes away but might as well have been on the moon. The phone calls had grown shorter over the years, the visits less frequent. I understood, in the way that mothers do, that children have their own lives to live. But understanding and accepting are different things, entirely. Understanding doesn't fill the quiet spaces. It doesn't make the phone ring. I'd started writing in my journal again, something I hadn't done since Derek was small. Just thoughts, memories, fragments of the day. "The roses are blooming beautifully," I'd write. "Made George's favorite lemon cake today, though I'm not sure why." Old habits. I never wrote about the loneliness directly. It felt too much like complaining. I'd been raised not to complain. This particular morning, the morning that would change everything, I woke to rain pattering against the bedroom window. May rain, the kind that makes the roses bloom more vibrantly afterward. I followed my usual routine: tea, music, journal. But something felt different, heavier, like the air before a storm. I'd been thinking about Mother's Day, you see. It was coming up that Sunday, and I'd been trying not to expect anything. Derek had forgotten my birthday 2 months prior. At least, he'd forgotten to call until 3 days later, his voice distracted and rushed. "Sorry, Mom, crazy time at work. You know how it is." But Mother's Day felt different. more important somehow. Maybe because it was the first one since I'd started feeling truly old. Not just older, but old in my bones, in my movements, in the way I sometimes forgot words or misplaced my glasses. Old in the way that made me wonder, late at night, what would happen when I couldn't manage this house anymore? I pushed the thought away, as I always did. Dwelling on such things served no purpose. Instead, I focused on the rain, on the way it made the roses nod their heavy heads, on the Chopin flowing. From my old record player, Raindrop Prelude, how perfect. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing my second cup of tea. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mrs. Patterson from next door sometimes stopped by with her homemade cookies, but she usually came in the afternoon. I set down my cup and walked to the front door. My slippers silent on the hardwood. Through the frosted glass I could see the shape of the postal worker. A certified letter, perhaps? I opened the door to find young Marcus, who'd been delivering mail to our street for 3 years now. He was one of the few people who still took time to chat, to ask about the roses, to remember George's name. "Morning, Mrs. James," he said, his uniform dark with rain spots. "Got a delivery for you. Needs a signature." I signed the electronic. Pad thanked him and closed the door. The envelope was standard business size, thick paper, expensive. The return address made my heart flutter with hope. Derek's office. His company's letterhead, embossed and professional. I carried it to the sunroom, setting it on the small table beside my chair. My hands were shaking just slightly, but enough that I noticed, enough that I had to set down my teacup before I stay. I spilled. When was the last time Derek had sent me a letter? Couldn't remember. Everything was phone calls now, and even those were rare. But here was an envelope addressed in his assistant's careful handwriting. Delivered 3 days before Mother's Day. I opened it slowly, savoring the anticipation. Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a letter, but a brochure. Glossy, colorful, with a photo of a modern building surrounded by manicured lawns. Sunset Manor Senior Living Community. The heading read, "Where comfort meets care." My hands grew still. This wasn't what I'd expected. I turned the brochure over, looking for a note, a card, some explanation. There, stuck to the back, was a small yellow sticky note in Derek's familiar handwriting. "Just thinking ahead, this place looks perfect for you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, the sound echoing in the quiet sunroom. The brochure fluttered to the floor. I stared at that sticky note until the words blurred. Just thinking ahead. Not Happy Mother's Day, not I love you, not even hope you're well. Just a brochure for a nursing home and a casual note about how perfect it would be for me. I bent to pick up the brochure, my movements slow and careful. The photos showed smiling elderly people in common areas, playing bingo, eating in a cafeteria, being helped by uniformed staff. 24-hour care. One caption read, "Peace of mind for families." Peace of mind. For families. I sat back in my chair, holding the brochure with both hands. The Chopin had ended, and the record player's needle was making that soft scratching sound it made when it reached the end. But I couldn't bring myself to get up and change it. I couldn't bring myself to move at all. Derek thought I needed to be in a nursing home. More than that, he thought it looked perfect for me. As if I were a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed. As if the house George and I had built together, the roses he'd planted, the piano I'd played for 32 years of teaching, as if none of that mattered. I thought about the last time I'd seen Derek. It had been Christmas nearly 5 months ago. He'd come for dinner with his wife, Jennifer, and their 2 children, Ma, who was 7, and little James, who was 4. They'd stayed for exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes. I knew because I'd watched the clock, hoping they'd stay longer. Hoping Emma might ask me to play piano like she used to, but Emma had been glued to her tablet, and James had been fussy, wanting to go home. Jennifer had made polite conversation about the weather and her yoga classes. while Derek had seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. When they'd left, Emma had given me a quick hug and James had waved from the car. Derek had kissed my cheek and said, "We'll call soon, Mom." But he hadn't called. Not once in 5 months, and now this. I got up slowly, my joints protesting, and walked to the kitchen. I needed to make more tea. I needed to do something with my hands, something familiar and comforting. The routine of it, water in the kettle, tea leaves in the strainer. The 4-minute wait might help me think clearly. But as I stood there, waiting for the water to boil, all I could think about was the sticky note. Just thinking ahead, not even signed. Just a casual afterthought about disposing of his mother. The kettle whistled, and I poured the water over the tea leaves. As I waited for it to steep, I found myself really looking at my kitchen for the first time in months. The white cabinets. George had installed the backsplash. We'd chosen together tiny blue flowers that matched the ones in our wedding china. The windowsill where I grew herbs. The counter where I'd taught Derek to make cookies when he was 8 years old. This was my home, my life. And Derek wanted me to leave it all behind for a sterile room in a building full of strangers, where I'd eat food I didn't choose and follow schedules I didn't set. I carried my tea back to the sunroom, stepping carefully over the brochure that still lay on the floor. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't bear to touch it again just yet. The rain had stopped and weak sunlight was filtering through the windows. The roses looked brighter for their soaking, their petals clean and vibrant. George's roses. Our roses. The ones I'd learned to care for so I could keep a piece of him alive. I sat down and took a sip of my tea, trying to calm the storm of emotions churning in my chest. Hurt, anger, betrayal. But underneath it all, something else. A kind of profound sadness that felt like it might drown me if I wasn't careful. When had I become a problem to be solved? When had I stopped being Derek's mother and become just another responsibility on his list? I thought about the boy who used to race home from school to tell me about his day, who'd sit beside me on the piano bench and try to play along with whatever piece I was practicing. The teenager who'd been embarrassed by my presence at his school events but still wanted me. There, the young man who'd called me every Sunday during his first year of college, homesick and lonely. Where had that boy gone? When had he been replaced by this stranger who sent nursing home brochures instead of Mother's Day cards? The phone rang, and for a moment, my heart leaped. Derek, maybe he was calling to explain. To apologize? To tell me the brochure was a mistake. I hurried to the kitchen where the cordless phone sat in its cradle. "Hello, Mrs. James. This is Rebecca from Dr. Martinez's office. I'm calling to confirm your appointment next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. My shoulders sagged. Yes, thank you. I'll be there." Wonderful. And remember, you'll need to bring your insurance card and a list of your current medications, of course. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone. Dr. Martinez was my internist, a kind woman who'd been monitoring my blood pressure and the early signs of osteoarthritis in my hands. Nothing serious, nothing that required any kind of specialized care, certainly nothing that required a nursing home. But Derek didn't know that. Derek didn't know anything about my health, my daily routine, my capabilities. He'd made his decision based on ... what? My age. The fact that I lived alone. The assumption that elderly people were inherently helpless. I walked back to the sunroom, my tea growing cold in my hands. The brochure was still on the floor, face down, the sticky note visible. I stared at it for a long moment, then set down my tea and picked it up. Sunset Manor Senior Living Community. I read through the information more carefully this time. Facility was 45 minutes away, on the other side of town. It was expensive, more than my monthly Social Security and George's pension combined. Which meant Derek had looked into the financial aspects too. He'd planned this. The thought made my stomach turn. How long had he been thinking about this? How many conversations had he had with Jennifer about the mother problem? How many times had they discussed my future as if I weren't capable of deciding it myself? I set the brochure on the table and stared out at the roses. George's voice echoed in my memory. Plants are like people, Ellie, they need attention, care, and sometimes they need you to cut away the parts that aren't serving them anymore. Maybe it was time to cut away the parts that weren't serving me. The thought surprised me with its clarity. I'd been so focused on holding on to Derek, on maintaining our relationship despite his growing distance, that I'd forgotten something important. Relationships were supposed to be mutual. They were supposed to involve love, respect, consideration for each other's feelings. This brochure showed none of those things. It was a unilateral decision, a presumption about my needs and capabilities. It was, in its way, a kind of abandonment. I got up and walked to the piano, running my fingers over the keys. The sound was soft, tentative, like a question being asked. I began to play not Chopin this time, but something simpler. A lullaby I used to sing to Derek when he was small. Back when I was the most important person in his world, the melody flowed from memory, my fingers finding their way across the keys despite the slight stiffness in my joints. I could remember Derek as a toddler, curled up in my lap as I played, his small hand resting on mine as if he could absorb the music through touch. Where had that little boy gone? When had he stopped needing me? When had he stopped loving me? The song ended, and I sat with my hands resting on the keys, listening to the silence. Outside, a cardinal was singing in the oak tree, its song bright and clear. George had always said cardinals were messenger signs from loved ones who'd passed on. What do you think, George? I whispered to the empty room. What should I do? Of course he didn't answer. But as I sat there, I found myself thinking about the safe upstairs, the one hidden behind the painting in our bedroom. George had made me promise to open it if anything ever happened to him, but I'd been putting it off for 3 years. Too painful. To final, maybe it was time. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister George had sanded and stained himself. Our bedroom was exactly as we'd left it the morning he'd gone to the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine procedure. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand. His cologne still sat on the dresser. The painting was a small watercolor of the rose garden, something I'd done years ago during a brief artistic phase. Behind it was a small wall safe, the kind you'd find in a hotel room. George had insisted on it, saying it was important to keep important documents secure. I'd memorized the combination years ago. 04-7, Derek's birthday. My fingers trembled as I entered the numbers, but the safe opened with a soft click. Inside were the usual things: our birth certificates, marriage license, insurance policies, the deed to the house. But there was also something I'd never seen before: manila envelope, with my name written on it in George's careful handwriting. I took it out with shaking hands and sat on the edge of the bed. The envelope was sealed, with a note on the outside: for Eleanor, to be opened only if you ever need to remember how much you're loved. I broke the seal carefully, as if it were made of glass. Inside was a letter written in George's familiar script, and beneath it a smaller envelope sealed. With wax dot: my dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing something difficult. I hope I'm wrong about what that something might be. But I've learned to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. I've been worried about Derek lately, not worried about his success. He's doing well in his career and his family is healthy. But worried about his heart. It's become harder somehow, more focused on practical matters and less on the things that really matter. I've seen the way he looks at you sometimes, as if you're becoming a burden to him. It breaks my heart. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he'll surprise us both with his love and devotion. But if I'm right, if he ever makes you feel like you're not wanted or valued, I want you to remember something. You are the most precious thing in my life. And you deserve better than that. The sealed envelope contains something I hope you'll never need to use. But if the time comes when Derek forgets who you aren't because of illness, but because of indifference, then you'll know what to do. I love you, Eleanor. I've loved you since the moment I first heard you play piano in that little cafe downtown. I've loved you through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and failure. And I'll love you long after I'm gone. Your devoted husband, George, had to stop reading to wipe my eyes. Even after death, George was taking care of me, looking out for me. I could almost hear his voice in the words, gentle and loving and wise. I picked up this smaller envelope, noting how heavy it felt. Inside was a legal document, something called a conditional trust amendment, and a small digital recorder. The kind George had used for taking notes about his work projects. The legal document was complex, full of terminology I didn't understand, but the summary at the end was clear enough. Derek's inheritance from George's estate had been placed in a conditional trust. If Derek ever attempted to place me in a care facility against my will, or if he ever demonstrated a fundamental disregard for Eleanor's autonomy and dignity, the trust would be voided and the money would go to the local music education foundation instead. I stared at the document, hardly believing what I was reading. George had suspected this might happen. He'd planned for it. He'd protected me, even after death. But there was more. A sticky note on the recorder read, "Play this only if you need proof of Derek's intentions." With trembling fingers, I pressed the play button. The sound quality was poor, but I could make out voices. Derek's voice, younger, but unmistakably his. And another voice, Jennifer's. "I'm just saying, we need to think about the future," Derek was saying. "She's getting older and she's all alone in that big house. What if something happens?" "Your mother seems perfectly capable to me," Jennifer replied. "She's only 71. Derek, that's not that old, but it will be. And she's already showing signs, forgetting things, getting confused about dates. Last week she thought it was my birthday when it wasn't until next month. I remembered that day. Derek had called, and I'd been so happy to hear from him that I'd wished him a happy birthday. It had been an innocent mistake, the kind anyone might make, but apparently he'd seen it as evidence of declining mental capacity. I just think it would be easier if she made the transition while she still has some of her faculties before it becomes a crisis. Derek, that's awful. You're talking about putting your mother in a home because she might need help someday. Being practical, Jen. This is what happens when people get old. They can't take care of themselves anymore. And I can't be running over there every time she needs something. When's the last time you visited her? There was a pause. That's not the point. It's exactly the point. You're planning to ship her off to a nursing home when you can't even be bothered to visit her now. It's not shipping her off. It's making sure she's safe and cared for. Some of these places are really nice, like resort communities. She might even enjoy it. Would you enjoy it? Another pause. That's different, is it? Derek, I think you need to really examine your motives here. Are you worried about your mother's well-being? Or are you worried about the inconvenience she might cause you? I resent that. I'm sorry, but I have to ask. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist yet. Your mother is healthy, independent, and happy. Why are you so eager to change that? The recording ended there, but I sat with the little device in my hands, staring at it as if it might suddenly make sense. The conversation was several years old. I could tell by the reference to my age, but Derek's attitude was clear. I wasn't a person to him. I was a problem to be managed, and now with this brochure, he was putting his plan into action. I looked at the legal document again, reading it more carefully this time. The trust was substantial enough to set Derek up for life, to ensure his children's college educations, to provide security for his family. But if the conditions were met, it would all go to the music foundation instead. George had known. Somehow he'd known that Derek might choose convenience over love, practicality over compassion. And he'd made sure I wouldn't be defenseless when that moment came. I folded the letter carefully and put everything back in the envelope. Then I sat for a long moment, looking around the bedroom George and I had shared for 37 years. The quilt my mother had made us as a wedding gift. The photographs on the dresser, our wedding, Derek's graduation, family vacations from when he was small. I thought about the young man in those photos, the boy who'd loved me unconditionally, and I felt a deep sadness for what we'd lost. But I also felt something else, a kind of calm resolve. Derek had made his choice. He'd chosen to see me as a burden rather than a person. He'd chosen to plan my future without consulting me. He'd chosen to send me a brochure for a nursing home as his Mother's Day gift. Now it was my turn to choose. I went downstairs and picked up the brochure from the sunroom floor. I read through it one more time, taking in every detail. Then I walked to the kitchen and found a pen. On the back of the sticky note I wrote, "Thank you for thinking of me." I found an even better solution. I sealed the brochure in a new envelope and wrote Derek's home address on the front. Then I put on my coat and walked to the post office, the rain having stopped entirely. The sun was shining now, making the wet street sparkle. Mrs. Chen, the postal clerk, smiled when she saw me. "Good afternoon, Mrs. James. How are you today?" "I'm well, thank you. I need to mail this certified, please." "Of course. Sign here and here." I signed the forms carefully, my handwriting steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing. This was the first step in what would be a complete transformation of my life. But it felt right. It felt like I was finally taking control of my own story. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Robert Chun, Mrs. Chun's son, who'd taken over his father's practice. I'd known him since he was a boy, and he'd handled George's will and estate planning. "Mrs. James, how nice to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm well, Robert, but I need to discuss something with you. Something about George's will." "Of course. Can you come in this afternoon? I have an opening at 3. I'll be there." Robert's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, all dark wood and leather chairs. He was a kind man, methodical and careful, with his father's gentle manner and his mother's sharp intelligence. I showed him the envelope from the safe, explaining what had happened with Derek and the brochure. He read through the legal documents carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. "This is quite comprehensive," he said finally. "Your husband was very thorough. The conditions are clearly defined and the documentation is solid. If you want to invoke this clause, we can do so." What exactly would happen? The trust would be voided immediately. Derek would lose access to his inheritance, and the funds would transfer to the Music Foundation as specified. Given the amount involved, it would be a significant loss for him. And there's no way to reverse it. Not according to the terms your husband set up. He was very specific about that. This was meant to be a final decision, not a temporary punishment. I sat back in my chair, considering. This would change everything for Derek, his financial future, his children's opportunities, his security. But then I thought about the brochure, about the casual dismissal of my autonomy and dignity, about the years of growing distance, the forgotten phone calls, the sense that I'd become nothing more than an obligation. "I want to do it," I said. Robert nodded. "I'll need you to sign some papers and make a formal statement about Derek's actions. Are you prepared for his reaction?" "I'm prepared for whatever comes." But I wasn't prepared for the phone call that came 3 days later. Derek's voice was frantic, desperate, in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. What the hell have you done, Derek?" I kept my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "I take it you received my note, your note. You've destroyed my life. Do you understand what you've done? The trust is gone. Everything Dad left me is gone. How could you do this?" I did what I felt was necessary. Necessary. It's because of a brochure. I was just trying to be practical, to think ahead. You were trying to dispose of me. That's not true. I was trying to make sure you were safe and cared for. That place has excellent reviews, Mom. They have activities, Medical staff on site, everything you could need. Everything except my freedom. Freedom. What freedom? You're 74 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency? What if I want to make my own decisions about my own life? There was a long silence. Then Derek's voice, quieter now, but still strained. You're being unreasonable. Am I, Derek? When was the last time you visited me? I don't see what that has to do with anything. It has everything to do with it. You want to make decisions about my life, but you don't participate in it. You send me a brochure for a nursing home as your Mother's Day gift, and you think I'm the one being unreasonable. I was trying to help. You were trying to solve a problem. The problem being me. Another silence. Then, look, Mom, I'm sorry about the timing. I know the brochure on Mother's Day was insensitive, but the trust you can't just take away. My inheritance because you're upset about a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Derek. This is a fundamental difference in how we see our relationship. You see me as a burden to be managed. I see myself as a person deserving of respect. Of course you deserve respect, but you also need to be realistic about your situation. You're getting older and things are only going to get harder. I'm trying to plan for that. Without consulting me, without asking what I want. What you want isn't always what's best for you. The words hung between us like a blade. This was it the thing he'd been thinking but never saying. I wasn't competent to make my own decisions anymore. I was a child who needed managing. I see, I said quietly. And who decides what's best for me? You. I'm your son. I love you. I want what's best for you. Love isn't controlling someone's life without their consent, Derek. This is insane. You're throwing away my children's futures, my security, our family's financial stability. Because of a misunderstanding about a brochure, I'm protecting my autonomy from a son who no longer sees me as a person. That's not, he stopped, and I heard him take a deep breath. Mom, please, let's talk about this reasonably. I'll come over this weekend. We'll discuss your concerns, and we'll figure out a solution that works for everyone. I'm afraid it's too late for that. It's never too late. You're my mother. I love you. You love the idea of me, Derek. You love the memory of who I used to be. But you don't love who I am now, an independent woman who's capable of making her own decisions. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you asked me about my day, about my health, about whether I'm happy? When's the last time you visited just to spend time with me, not because you needed something? The silence stretched on so long that I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice small and defeated. I don't know. I do. It's been years, Derek. Years since you saw me as anything other than a problem to be solved. I can change. I can do better. I'm sure you can. But I'm not going to wait around hoping you will. What does that mean? It means I'm making my own plans for my future. Plans that don't involve nursing homes or children who see me as a burden. Please, don't do this. Don't throw away our relationship over a mistake. I'm not throwing it away, Derek. I'm acknowledging that it's already gone. Has been for years. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of the sunroom, listening to the silence. The roses were blooming beautifully outside, their petals soft and full. George's roses thriving under my care. I thought about the boy Derek had been, the young man who'd called me every Sunday from college. I mourned for that relationship, for the closeness we'd once shared. But I also felt a sense of relief, as if I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I'd been shouldering for years. The next few weeks were busy. I met with Robert several times to finalize the trust transfer. I contacted a real estate agent about selling the house, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The house was full of memories, but it was also full of ghosts. It was time for a new chapter. I also visited several retirement communities, not nursing homes, but active senior communities where I could maintain my independence while having access to social activities and support services. I found one that was perfect, a place called Harmony Gardens, about 20 minutes from downtown. It had individual apartments, a community center with a beautiful grand piano, and gardens where residents could grow their own flowers. But the best part was the music program. They needed someone to teach piano lessons to the children in the community, grandchildren visiting their grandparents, young families who lived in the adjacent neighborhood. So we'd be part-time, flexible, and exactly the kind of purposeful activity I'd been missing. I signed a lease on a bright, sunny apartment with a view of the gardens. It was smaller than the house George and I had shared, but it was mine. I arranged for movers to take my most precious possessions, the piano, my books, my music collection, and a few pieces of furniture that held special meaning. The rest would be sold with the house. I didn't need it anymore. Derek called twice. More during this period. The first time he was angry, threatening to contest the trust revocation. Second time, he was pleading, asking me to reconsider. Both times I listened politely and then repeated the same message. My decision was final. The day before I moved, I spent one last evening in the house, played the piano for hours, filling the empty rooms with music. Chopin, Debussy, and the simple lullabies I'd sung to Derek when he was small. The melodies echoed off the walls, carrying with them the weight of all the years I'd spent in this place. As I played, I thought about George and the love we'd shared. I thought about the young woman I'd been when we'd first moved into this house, full of dreams and plans. I thought about the mother I'd been, devoted and patient and endlessly hopeful. I thought about the woman I was becoming, independent, self-determined, no longer defined by other people's expectations or needs. It felt frightening and liberating at the same time. When I finished playing, I closed the piano lid and walked through the house one last time. In the kitchen, I touched the countertop where I'd taught Derek to make cookies. In the living room, I paused at the mantelpiece where his school photos had stood. In the bedroom, I looked at the space where George's side of the bed used to be. Then I turned off the lights and walked out the front door, locking it behind me. The next morning, the movers came. They were efficient and careful, wrapping my piano in blankets and padding, boxing up my books and music. By noon, everything was loaded into the truck. I followed them to Harmony Gardens in my own car, George's old sedan that I'd learned to drive after he died. The apartment was waiting for me, keys in hand from the property manager, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Welcome to Harmony Gardens, Mrs. James," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I think you're going to love it here." The apartment was on the second floor, with large windows that looked out over the community gardens. Sunlight streamed in, making the hardwood floors gleam. The movers brought in my piano first, positioning it by the window where I could see the flowers while I played. As they worked, I stood in the center of what would become my new living room, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about the future. Not anxiety, not resignation, but genuine anticipation for what was to come. Mrs. Rodriguez gave me a tour of the facilities while the movers finished. The community center was beautiful, with a large common room, a library, and a music room with acoustics that made my heart sing. The dining room offered both communal meals and the option to eat alone, depending on your mood. The fitness center had equipment designed for seniors, and the gardens were maintained by residents who wanted to participate. "We have a very active community here," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as we walked through the corridors. "Book clubs, art classes, gardening groups. And now we'll have piano lessons, thanks to you. When would you like me to start?" "Whenever you're ready. We have several children already interested, some grandchildren of residents, and some from the neighborhood families. There's also talk of starting an adult beginner class." The thought of teaching again filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. These wouldn't be students whose parents forced them to take lessons, but people who chose to learn, who wanted to discover the joy of music. By evening, I was settled enough to make my first meal in the new kitchen. Nothing fancy, just tea and a simple sandwich, but I ate it sitting by the window. watching the sunset paint the gardens in shades of gold and pink dot. The phone rang around 8 o'clock. For a moment, I thought it might be Derek, but the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mrs. James. This is Emma. Derek's Emma. Your granddaughter. My heart stopped. Emma was 7 years old, Derek's daughter. I hadn't heard her voice in months. Emma, sweetheart, how did you get this number? Ask Daddy for it. He said you moved to a new house. I did. Smaller place, but very nice. How are you, darling? I'm okay. Her voice was small, uncertain. Daddy seems sad lately. He says it's because of grown-up things, but I think it's because of you. The honesty of children. It could break your heart and heal it at the same time. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, sweetheart. It doesn't mean we don't love each other. But you're not coming for dinner anymore, and Daddy said you're not. That you don't want to see us. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar ache of loss. But this was different from the loss of Derek's. This was the loss of innocence, of a child's simple understanding of family. That's not true, Emma. I would love to see you. But sometimes things are complicated between grown-ups. Are you mad at Daddy? How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her father tried to put you in a nursing home without your consent? How do you tell her that love sometimes isn't enough to bridge the gap between what people want and what they're willing to give? I'm not mad, sweetheart. Just ... sad. Sometimes people grow apart even when they love each other. But you could grow back together, couldn't you? Like when I fight with Sarah at school and then we make up. It's a little more complicated than that, Emma. Will you come to my school concert next week? I'm playing the piano. The song you taught me. My breath caught. You're still playing? Yes. I practice every day. Well, almost every day. I wanted to call you and tell you, but Daddy said you were too busy. Too busy, as if I had anything more important to do than listen to my granddaughter talk about music. I would love to come to your concert, Emma, but you'll need to ask your parents first. Okay? I will. I'll ask right now. Wait. But she was already gone, and I could hear muffled voices in the background. Derek's voice, then Jennifer's, then Emma's high, excited chatter. After a few minutes, Derek came to the phone. Mom. His voice was strained, tired. Hello, Derek. Emma wants you to come to her concert. I told her I'd ask you, but I don't think it's a good idea right now. Why not? Because ... Because things are complicated. Because I don't want to confuse the kids about what's happening. What is happening, Derek? You tell me. You're the one who destroyed our family's future. I've protected my autonomy. There's a difference, is there? 'Cause from where I'm sitting, it looks like you chose money over family. The accusations stung, but I kept my voice level. I chose dignity over being warehoused. I chose self-respect over being managed like a problem. Not what I was doing, wasn't it? Derek, you sent me a brochure for a nursing home as your Mother's Day gift. You didn't ask if I wanted to move. You didn't ask if I needed help. You just assumed I was ready to be disposed of. I was trying to be practical. You were trying to be convenient for yourself. There was a long silence. Then Emma really wants you to come to her concert. And I really want to be there. If you come, people will ask questions about why you moved, about why we're not speaking regularly anymore. And what would you tell them? I don't know. You could tell them the truth, that we had a disagreement about my future and I chose to make my own decisions. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple, Derek. You wanted me to give up my independence. I refused. End of story. You're being stubborn. I'm being strong. There's a difference. Another silence. Then, quietly, she's been practicing that song for weeks. She wanted to surprise you. Then let her. Let me come to the concert and we can worry about the rest later. I can't promise things will be normal between us. I'm not asking for normal, Derek. I'm asking for the chance to hear my granddaughter play piano. Fine. But we're not talking about the trust. We're not talking about the money. We're just grandparents and parents at a school concert. Agreed. The concert was held in the elementary school gymnasium with folding chairs arranged in rows and a small stage at the front. I arrived early, wearing my best dress and carrying a small bouquet of flowers from the Harmony Gardens garden. I spotted Derek and Jennifer sitting in the third row, with little James fidgeting in his seat. Derek looked tired, older somehow, with lines around his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Jennifer gave me a tentative wave, and I waved back. I took a seat 2 rows behind them, close enough to be supportive, but far enough to avoid awkwardness. Other grandparents and parents filled the seats around me, everyone chattering excitedly about their children's performances. The lights dimmed, and the music teacher introduced the first performer. Child after child took the stage, some confident, others nervous, all of them doing their best to share their musical gifts with the audience. And then it was Emma's turn. She walked onto the stage in a blue dress with white flowers, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted her position, and placed her small hands on the keys. The first notes of Far Elise filled the gymnasium, clear and precise. It was the simplified version I'd taught her during one of our last visits, but she played it with such concentration, such evident love for the music that it brought tears to my eyes. She made it through the entire piece without a mistake, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who'd practiced diligently. When she finished, she stood and curtsied, her face bright with pride and accomplishment. The applause was enthusiastic, but no one clapped harder than I did. As Emma left the stage, she caught my eye and smiled, the kind of pure, joyful smile that reminded me why I'd spent 32 years teaching children to love music. After the concert, parents and grandparents gathered in the hallway, congratulating their young performers. Emma ran to me immediately, her face glowing with excitement. "Grandma, did you hear me play? Did I do good?" "You did wonderfully, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. I practiced every day just like you taught me. Well, almost every day. It showed. You played with such beautiful expression." Derek and Jennifer approached us slowly, James hanging back shyly behind his mother's legs. "Hello, Eleanor," Jennifer said, her voice careful but not unfriendly. "You look well, thank you." "You both do too." Derek nodded awkwardly. "Emma's been working really hard on that piece. It was beautiful. You should be proud." Emma tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma, will you come to my next concert too? It's not until Christmas, but I'm going to play something harder." I glanced at Derek, who was studying his shoes. "We'll see, sweetheart. That's still a long way off, but you'll try. I'll try." As we walked toward the parking lot, Emma slipped her hand into mine. It was small and warm, and it reminded me of Derek's hand when he was her age, trusting and affectionate. "I miss you, Grandma," she said quietly. "I wish you still came for Sunday dinners." "I miss you too, sweetheart. Why don't you come any more?" Looked at Derek, who was walking slightly ahead with Jennifer and James. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set. This was the conversation he'd been dreading. "Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean we don't love each other, but sometimes we need some time to figure things out." "Are you and Daddy fighting?" "Not fighting. Exactly. Just ... Seeing things differently." "About what?" Derek stopped walking and turned back to us. "Emma, that's enough questions for now. We need to get going. But I want to talk to Grandma more." "Another time, sweetheart," I said, squeezing her hand. "But remember, even when we're not together, I'm always thinking about you and your brother. Will you call me?" I looked at Derek again. He was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read, part sadness, part frustration, part something else, longing, maybe. "If your parents say it's okay," I said finally. Emma looked at her father with hopeful eyes. "Daddy, can Grandma call me sometimes?" Derek's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, she can call you." "When?" "Emma," Jennifer said gently, "we need to let Grandma go now. It's getting late." Emma hugged me fiercely around the waist. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart." more than all the stars in the sky. She giggled. It was something I used to say to Derek when he was small. That's a lot, it is indeed. As they walked away, Emma turned back twice to wave. Derek didn't look back at all, but Jennifer did, giving me a small, sad smile that seemed to say she understood more than she could express. I drove home to Harmony Gardens with my heart full of conflicting emotions. Joy at hearing Emma play, pride in her accomplishment, sadness at the distance between Derek and me, and something else, a kind of cautious hope. Maybe things could never be the same between Derek and me. Maybe too much had happened, too many words had been said, too many fundamental differences revealed. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to coexist for the sake of the children who loved us both. Back in my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the garden. The flowers were beginning to close for the night, their petals folding inward like hands in prayer. Tomorrow, they would open again, reaching toward the sun. I thought about George's roses, which would be blooming now in the yard of the house where strangers lived. I wondered if the new owners would care for them properly, if they would understand the love that had gone into every pruning, every feeding, every careful tending. But perhaps it didn't matter. Perhaps the love was what had made them beautiful, not the caretaking itself. Perhaps the beauty would continue even without George's hands to tend it, even without mine to remember it. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I almost didn't answer. It's nearly 10 o'clock, but something made me pick up. Hello, Mom. Mom Derek's voice, quiet and uncertain. Yes. I just wanted to say, Emma played beautifully tonight. She did. You should be very proud. I am. And I know, I know you're part of why she loves music so much. It's the lessons you gave her, the way you encouraged her. I don't want to take that away from her. I appreciate that, Derek. I've been thinking about what you said, about not asking what you wanted, about making decisions for you instead of with you. I waited, not wanting to interrupt whatever he was trying to say. I guess I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was protecting myself too. It's from having to think about you getting older, about what that might mean for all of us. It's frightening, I said softly. Getting older, I mean, for all of us. I handled it badly. The brochure, the way I approached it, I should have talked to you first. Yes, you should have. But the trust, Mom, what Dad did. It feels like punishment for trying to care about you, even if I did it wrong. Father wasn't punishing you, Derek. He was protecting me from being seen as a burden instead of a person. I don't see you as a burden, don't you? When's the last time you visited just to spend time with me? When's the last time you asked about my day, my health, my happiness? The silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, I don't know. I can't remember. That's the problem, Derek. You stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a responsibility. And responsibilities are burdens. I can change. Can you? Because change requires more than just saying you'll do better. It requires fundamentally shifting how you think about our relationship. I want you to try too, but I'm not going to wait around hoping you will. I'm building a life here, Derek, a good life, a life where I'm valued and respected and seen as more than just someone's aging mother. At Harmony Gardens, yes, I'm teaching piano again to children who want to learn, who light up when they master a new piece. I'm making friends. I'm living on my own terms. That sounds ... good. It is good. It's the life I want to be living. And there's no room in it for me. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with longing and regret. There could be, I said finally, but it would have to be on equal terms. As adults who respect each other's autonomy. As people who choose to be in each other's lives, not just because we're related. I don't know if I know how to do that. Then you'll have to learn. Just like Emma is learning to play piano. It takes practice, patience, and a willingness to make mistakes and keep trying. And if I really genuinely try to be better, would you? Would you consider changing your mind about the trust? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the question. This was what it always came back to: the money, the inheritance, the financial security that Derek felt he deserved simply by virtue of being George's son. Derek, the trust isn't about punishment. It's about principles. Your father set up those conditions because he believed that family should be based on love and respect, not obligation and convenience. I do love you. I know you do. But love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by respect and consideration. So there's no way back. No way to fix this. There's always a way back, Derek. But it starts with understanding why we're here in the first place. And it starts with you genuinely wanting a relationship with me, not just wanting access to the money. I do want a relationship with you, then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Visit me. Call me. Ask about my life. Show Emma and James that grandparents are people worth knowing, not just problems to be managed. And if I do that, then we'll see. But Derek, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was before all this happened. I'm not going to go back to being the passive, accommodating mother who accepted whatever crumbs of attention you were willing to give me. I don't want you to be passive. Good, because I'm not going to be. We talked for another hour, cautiously, exploring the possibility of rebuilding something from the wreckage of our relationship. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. A recognition that we had both made mistakes, that we had both hurt each other, and that healing would require effort from both of us. When I hung up the phone, I felt drained but oddly hopeful. Change was possible even at 74. Even after years of growing apart, even after profound betrayal and disappointment. It was possible to find a new way forward. I got ready for bed slowly, savoring the quiet rituals of my new life. Brushing my teeth in my own bathroom, changing into my favorite nightgown, setting out my clothes for the next day. Small things, but they were my things, my choices, my life. As I lay in bed, I could hear the soft sounds of the community settling in for the night. Doors closing, televisions turning off, the gentle hum of lives being lived with dignity and purpose. I was part of something again, not just existing in isolation, but participating in a community of people who valued independence and mutual respect. Tomorrow, I would teach my first piano lesson to a 6-year-old named Sophie, whose grandmother lived in the apartment below mine. Next week, I would start an adult beginner class for 3 residents who had always wanted to learn. Next month, I would perform in the community's talent show, playing Chopin for an audience who would appreciate the beauty of the music rather than just tolerate it. This was my life now. Not the life Derek had planned for me, not the life I had imagined when George was alive, but the life I was choosing for myself. It was smaller in some ways, quieter, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 6 months later, I was sitting in my sunroom. My new apartment had a sunroom too, though smaller than the one in the old house when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but visitors were always welcome at Harmony Gardens. I opened the door to find Derek standing in the hallway, holding a small potted plant. He looked nervous, uncertain, but also somehow younger than he had at Emma's concert. "Hi, Mom. I brought you something." I looked at the plant. It was a small rosebush, the kind that would bloom indoors with proper care. Pink petals just like the ones in George's garden. "It's beautiful," I said, taking it from him. "Thank you." I know it's not the same as Dad's roses, but I thought you might like to have something to tend again. I invited him in, and we sat in the sunroom with tea and cookies I'd made that morning. He told me about work, about Jennifer's new job, about Emma's progress with piano and James's fascination with dinosaurs. I told him about my students, about the friends I'd made, about the small joys of my new life. It wasn't the same as it had been when he was young, and it wasn't the same as it might have been if things had gone differently, but it was something, a beginning, perhaps. A recognition that love doesn't end just because trust is broken, and that relationships can be rebuilt on new foundations if both people are willing to try. The trust remained with the music foundation. Derek had accepted that, eventually understanding that some actions have consequences that can't be undone. But he also understood something else, that the most valuable inheritance wasn't money, but the love and respect that create lasting bonds between people. As he prepared to leave, he paused. At the door. "Mom, would you like to come to Sunday dinner this week? Emma's been asking about you." I smiled, feeling something settle into place in my chest. "I'd like that very much." "Good. I'll pick you up at 5. I can drive myself, Derek." He looked surprised, then nodded. "Of course you can. I'll see you at 5 then." After he left, I sat with the little rosebush in my lap, feeling its potential for growth and beauty. Like all living things, it would need care, attention, and the right conditions to flourish. But with patience and love, it would bloom. I placed it on the windowsill where it would get the morning sun, and I thought about George, about the garden he'd planted, about the love he'd cultivated, not just in the soil, but in the hearts of those who knew him. His roses might be growing in someone else's garden now, but the love that had made them beautiful was still here, still growing, still finding new ways to bloom. And that, I thought, was enough, more than enough. It was everything.